Aisha Jackson was just a waitress. Invisible. Dismissed. Mocked for mispronouncing a word she taught herself in silence. But when a billionaire tried to humiliate her in front of the world, she answered in flawless French. What started as a joke became a war, and now they'll do anything to keep her out, even if it means destroying everything she loves. She didn't come to play their game. She came to rewrite the rules. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The floor of Le Rouge Noir shimmered like black ice, a mirror reflecting the opulence of a world Aisha Jackson had only ever admired from afar. Her hands trembled slightly as she tightened the last knot in her apron. It was her first shift at the elite French fusion restaurant, nestled in the heart of downtown Chicago. And though her heart pulsed with the weight of anxiety, her spine remained straight, rigid with purpose. She had worked too hard, bent over too many sink basins and food trays, to let nerves betray her. Raised in the thick of East Side Detroit, Aisha had learned early that the world saw her skin before her mind. Her mother, a housekeeper, often whispered French lullabies to her at night. Remnants of a Louisiana Creole heritage, barely held together through generations of silence. It was there among Detroit's cracked sidewalks and simmering summer heat that Aisha had fallen in love with words. French had always rolled off her tongue like a secret, her grandmother's language of resilience. But life hadn't given her the luxury of classrooms or Parisian cafes. Instead, she learned through bootleg tapes, borrowed library books, and late-night dreams. Dreams that somehow had brought her here. Don't get too comfortable, one of the senior servers, Camille, whispered as she passed Aisha at the staff locker. He's coming tonight. Aisha blinked. Who? Camille's lips curled with half-mockery. Alexander Hayes. You'll know him. Trust me. The name meant little to Aisha at first. But as whispers rippled through the kitchen like static, she learned quickly. Hayes wasn't just a billionaire. He was the billionaire. Real estate mogul, tech investor, silent backer of Le Rouge Noir, and notorious for wielding his power with precision. He was the kind of man who treated restaurants like stages, and servers like props. Word was, if you stumbled around him, he'd remember you, and not fondly. Still, Aisha told herself to focus. She rehearsed the menu under her breath, perfecting the pronunciation of every French item. The sauces, the wines, the desserts. Each syllable had to land just right. She didn't need admiration. She just didn't want to give anyone a reason to question why she was here. Yet by the time the velvet hour arrived, and the restaurant buzzed with violin strings and clinking glasses, Aisha could already feel eyes tracking her. Not from customers, but colleagues. She was the only black server on shift. Her name wasn't etched into the marble walls like legacy staff. She was new, and that meant vulnerable. Her first few tables went smoothly. Older couples, business clients, a table of university students, all smiled, took her suggestions, thanked her. But the tension in the air rose like heat when a group entered through the tall brass doors. Alexander Hayes had arrived. He wore a suit the color of tarnished steel, and walked as if the floor was made for him. He didn't glance at anyone. People moved around him like satellites to a sun. His table sat near the window, reserved like always. 4 other guests trailed behind, smiling, polished, clearly used to private jets and boardrooms. Camille, Section 4, the floor manager called out, referring to Hayes's table. But Camille passed Aisha with a cold smirk. You take it, she said softly. Welcome to Le Rouge Noir. Aisha's throat tightened. She tried to object, but her voice caught. Camille had vanished into the back. Her manager was busy, and the guests were already settling in. She approached the table, heart thudding. Alexander didn't look up until she was nearly beside him. Menu, please, he said curtly. Aisha handed each guest their menus, her fingers brushing the fine leather covers. Her mind raced through the French pronunciations. This was her moment, sink or swim. Alexander glanced at her name tag. Aisha, he said slowly, tasting it like something foreign. Are you new? Yes, sir, she replied evenly. First shift. He scanned her face, then turned to his companions. Let's see how this goes. They laughed softly. A dry, knowing laughter. Aisha felt it settle in her bones. She took their drink orders and returned moments later. As she poured the wine, Alexander glanced at the menu. I'll start with the quiche Lorraine, he said, overpronouncing the French deliberately. Let's see if she can pronounce that one. The table chuckled again, louder this time. Aisha's face flushed. She knew the word. She had practiced it dozens of times. But in that moment, under his gaze, in that spotlight, the vowels tripped. Her tongue caught, and it came out slightly off. Sorry, Alexander said, feigning concern. Did you say quiche or quitch? Laughter exploded. Not just at the table. Nearby diners turned. Staff paused. Her skin burned under invisible lights. A moment, a tiny slip was now a full spectacle. I'm still learning, she murmured. I'd suggest you learn fast, he said with icy amusement. Or stick to burgers. The table erupted again. Aisha felt the heat of humiliation wrap around her like chains. But deeper than the embarrassment was something else. Rage. The quiet kind. The kind that simmers beneath your ribs and coils around your dignity like smoke. She swallowed hard and walked back to the kitchen, where the clatter of dishes masked her shame. No one spoke. No one consoled. But she could feel the judgment humming in the silence. She leaned against the steel counter, her breathing shallow. You don't belong here. The thought wasn't hers, but it had been whispered to her so many times in so many ways that it had carved a groove in her soul. Still, she wasn't going to cry. Not here, not in front of people who wanted her to. Instead, she reached for the small flashcards tucked inside her apron pocket. Cards she had made herself, each one scribbled with French phrases, translations and pronunciation guides. She clenched them like a lifeline. And just as she did, she noticed a slip of paper on the prep counter, folded, out of place. She picked it up. It read, "If you want to learn real French, meet me behind the wine rack after shift." It wasn't signed. Her pulse quickened. Dinner rush just hit. Alexander Hayes is ordering again. And Aisha is the only server available. She must step up again. But this time something inside her has shifted. Aisha returned to the table, spine straight despite the pit sinking in her chest. Her palms still trembled slightly, betraying the storm brewing beneath her composed exterior. She approached Alexander Hayes and his guests with their wine, steadying her hand as she poured with practiced grace. But her mind was still tangled in the laughter, still echoing with the billionaire's cutting sarcasm. Hayes reclined in his chair like a man born to own the air around him. His silver cufflinks gleamed beneath the dim chandelier light, and his smile, a cold crescent of amusement, remained plastered on his face, like a badge of power. He was clearly enjoying himself. The rest of the table hushed as the entrees were ready to be ordered. Aisha held her notepad, fingers tightening as she awaited the next wave. "I'll have the quiche Lorraine," Hayes said again, drawing out each syllable, like a performance, his eyes never leaving hers. "And do take your time pronouncing it this time. We're not in a rush, are we?" The words didn't need to be sharp. His tone did the damage. A small ripple of laughter trembled across the table again. His companions didn't even attempt to hide their amusement this time. The woman to his left leaned into her partner's shoulder, whispering something while side-eyeing Aisha. She pressed her lips together. She knew how to say it. Her mind screamed it back to her, in perfect rhythm. But something about his eyes, his expectant cruelty, made her mouth hesitate. She began, "the key," but caught herself. Her tongue stumbled once more. "The quiche Lorraine," she said, too fast, trying to correct it midstream. The result only made things worse. Hayes leaned back with a slow exhale, shaking his head. "Unbelievable," he muttered, not to her but loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is what passes for staff now?" The statement wasn't just about her. It was about what she looked like, about what she represented. He hadn't said the word black, but it hung in the air unspoken, thick as smoke. She felt it all at once. The sting of dozens of eyes. Some were filled with discomfort, others with silent agreement. The kitchen staff paused. Even the maitre d' looked over, but didn't intervene. No one ever challenged Alexander Hayes. Aisha's hands began to sweat. Her eyes stung, but she blinked rapidly, forcing the tears back into submission. She wasn't going to cry. Not here, not over this. She had walked through too much to be broken by a sneer. Still, she felt small. So small. Like a child again. Standing in the hallway of her high school, when a substitute teacher asked her to speak properly in front of the class. She remembered her mother's hands braiding her hair that morning, telling her to never shrink, and yet here she was, shrinking. But beneath the shame, a new fire sparked. Her humiliation, instead of crushing her, began to fuel her. His mockery wasn't about her capability, It was about control. It was about reminding her that this wasn't her space, that she had wandered into a world not meant for someone who looked like her. But if he thought she would leave quietly, he didn't know who she was. Aisha steadied her breath, nodded once, and stepped away from the table. She fulfilled the remaining orders quickly, efficiently, avoiding eye contact. But inside, her heart made a promise. I will not just survive this. I will outshine it. Back in the kitchen, she moved on instinct, serving, wiping, cleaning, while her thoughts churned. She replayed the moment, over and over again, dissecting every sound, every syllable she fumbled. She didn't blame herself. Not anymore. That moment wasn't an accident. It was a setup, a performance designed to degrade. And yet she didn't feel defeated. She felt defiant. As she cleared a counter of empty glasses, a small folded note sat tucked beneath a plate. At first she thought it was trash, but the handwriting was careful, the fold deliberate. She picked it up and slowly opened it. Written in flowing cursive were the words, Je peux t'aider. Tu n'étais pas en tort. I can help you. You weren't wrong. She blinked. The French was perfect. It wasn't typed. It was handwritten, neat and deliberate. Someone had seen. Someone had understood. For a moment her breath hitched. She looked around the kitchen, but no one was watching her. Everyone was busy, moving in their own rhythm. Her heart raced. Who had sent it? The handwriting didn't look familiar. It wasn't Camille. It couldn't be the chef. His hands were too rough for penmanship. This fine. Maybe one of the newer hosts. Or someone on kitchen duty. Whoever it was, they knew she wasn't the failure that Hayes had tried to make her feel like. The note was more than just encouragement. It was a spark, a reminder that someone believed in her, and more importantly, that she wasn't alone in this. She carefully folded the note and slipped it into her apron pocket, close to the flashcards she'd made, the same ones she clung to like armor. Her language had always been her escape. And now it would be her weapon. She looked back toward the dining room, where Alexander Hayes sat casually sipping his Bordeaux, laughing with his companions as if nothing had happened. But everything happened. Because in that moment, while he was still basking in his own arrogance, she was already planning her redemption. Not just to prove a point, to dismantle his assumption, to speak the language he thought she didn't deserve. Later that evening, as she cleans the bar counter, a colleague passes by and murmurs in perfect French. Aisha's eyes widen. The note wasn't anonymous after all, and the sender might hold more secrets than she imagined. The soft clink of glass and cutlery filled the kitchen long after the last guest had left Le Rouge Noir that night. The elegant dining room, now dimmed and hushed, stood in contrast to the whirlwind of tension that had shaken it just hours earlier. Aisha lingered near the bar, wiping down surfaces with practiced hands, her mind not on cleanliness but on the note she had tucked safely inside her apron. She replayed the French phrase again and again in her head. Je peux t'aider. Tu n'étais pas en tort. The words echoed like comfort, like resistance. Then came the whisper. Your pronunciation on quiche Lorraine wasn't that bad. Aisha turned sharply. It was Luca, a busser barely older than 22, his curly hair half hidden beneath his cap, eyes tired but alert. He gave her a half smile, then switched smoothly into French. But I know you can do better. Her breath caught. So it was him. You, she whispered, her voice part cautious, part amazed. Luca nodded, leaning casually against the bar. I saw your flashcards a few weeks ago when you dropped your apron. I figured you were trying to teach yourself. He paused. You've got the right instincts. You just need someone to sharpen them. The moment hung between them, weighty and electric. Aisha didn't know whether to be embarrassed or relieved. She had kept her studying private for a reason. Pride, mostly. But now she realized it had been loneliness too. Nobody at Le Rouge Noir had ever seen her as more than a hire, certainly not someone worthy of investment. Until now. Why would you help me? She asked slowly. Luca shrugged. Because you deserve better than to be laughed at by a man like Hayes. And because my grandmother was like you, self-taught. She spoke 7 languages. People treated her like she was invisible until she made them regret it. Aisha's throat tightened. Luca walked around the bar and placed something beside her, cleaning cloth. A stack of old, worn note cards, dog-eared and smudged with ink. These were hers, he said softly. Start with these. You already know more than you think. She looked down at the cards. Each one was handwritten in both French and English, with small notes on pronunciation, emphasis, and usage. There were even short conversational phrases, like excusez-moi je vous recommande, and avez-vous des allergies alimentaires? Aisha exhaled slowly. She hadn't realized she was holding her breath. From that night forward, her real education began. After the last guest left, and the final dish was scrubbed, Aisha would meet Luca behind the wine rack. In the quiet stillness of the closing hour, among vintage Bordeaux and imported Rieslings, they would practice. He would quiz her. She would correct herself. He would push her until her tongue learned the rhythm again, until she could say coq au vin and tarte tatin without faltering. Some nights she was exhausted, her feet aching from 12 hours on the floor, but she refused to skip a single session. Every mispronounced syllable from that humiliating night became fuel. Word spread quickly among the staff that Aisha was doing too much. Some dismissed her efforts, muttering that she was just trying to impress the wrong people. Camille in particular made no secret of her disdain. "You're not going to be promoted to maître d' by learning how to say soupe à l'oignon," she had muttered one night. "They'll always see you the same." But Aisha didn't care about the title. She cared about power, not the kind Hayes wielded, but the kind that came from knowing, from mastering, from owning the space people told her she didn't belong in. And the stakes were rising, because word reached her, first as a whisper, then as a certainty, that Alexander Hayes had a pattern. He frequented elite restaurants across the country. Not for the food, for the power play. A private food blog under an alias. He posted anonymous reviews, always within 48 hours of dining, skewering staff performance, and more often than not, targeting servers of color. Rumors floated about 2 black waiters at a Miami restaurant who lost their jobs after one of Hayes's write-ups. Another woman in San Francisco had reportedly transferred to bar duty after he suggested she lacked finesse in French pronunciation. The more Aisha learned, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about pride. This was a pattern that chewed up people like her. Ambitious, bright, but unprotected, so she trained harder. Flashcards during her lunch break. Pronunciation drills whispered during bathroom runs. She read French blogs, watched YouTube videos late into the night, and mimicked accents until her voice cracked. Luca, for all his quiet demeanor, was relentless. He'd correct her mid-sentence, force her to redo sentences 5 times if the cadence was off. And somewhere along the way she began to believe she could do more than just avoid humiliation. She could win. One evening, while restocking wine bottles after close, Aisha overheard 2 of the bartenders talking near the register. "He called again," one said, half laughing. "Said he'd be back next Thursday." Once the same table. Aisha froze behind the wine rack, a bottle of rosé in her hand. Thursday. That was less than a week away. Her heart pounded. The same table. The same man. He was coming back. She clenched the bottle tighter, her knuckles whitening. But this time she would be ready. As she turns to return the bottle to the shelf, she finds a fresh card waiting, where Luca usually stood, except this one wasn't from him, and the French handwriting isn't familiar. The message: "Don't trust the boy who offers help. He has secrets too." The kitchen of Le Rouge Noir was never silent. Even after the last table had been cleared and the dining room dimmed, the industrial hum of freezers, the soft sputter of simmering sauces, and the occasional clang of a dropped ladle created an undercurrent of constant motion. It was the pulse of the restaurant, and lately, Aisha could feel that pulse tightening around her like a noose. The whispers had grown louder since word got out that Alexander Hayes was returning. Some of her coworkers were subtle, offering her nods of quiet encouragement or slipping away during breaks so she could study. Others weren't. "She's trying too hard," muttered Camille, while folding napkins behind the bar. "Trying to impress a man who'll never see her as more than help. She's just putting a target on all our backs," another server added under her breath. "If she messes up again, it's not just her. We'll all pay for it." Aisha overheard it all. She didn't respond, not because she agreed, but because her focus had narrowed to something razor sharp. Let them talk, let them doubt. She would let her work speak louder than their fear. That night, after the shift wound down, Aisha returned to the kitchen for her now nightly ritual. While others clocked out or smoked out back, she stood beside the stainless steel prep counter reciting French phrases under her breath. Her lips formed the words with care, correcting her own accent, dragging her vowels until they matched the audio clips she'd saved on her phone. "Soupe à l'oignon, escargot de Bourgogne, Chateaubriand, pour deux." The head chef Marcel Duval watched silently from across the room, arms folded over his chest. a grizzled Frenchman with a sharp tongue and a reputation for near-impossible standards. He rarely gave compliments. Most staff feared him. A few hated him. But Aisha had never spoken more than 10 words to him. Tonight, that changed. "You say soup like a Quebecois," he said abruptly, startling her mid-phrase. She turned, eyes wide. I'm trying to sound Parisian." Marcel walked over slowly, expression unreadable. He pointed toward the syllables with his finger, mimicking her mouth with precision. "Not soup, I. You round the uit. Like this soup, less breath. Think like you're swallowing it." Aisha mimicked the sound again. He listened, then gave the faintest of nods. "You have the ear," he said, "and the mouth, more than most. That's rare." Aisha blinked, unsure if she was hallucinating the compliment. "Merci," she whispered. Marcel looked around, making sure no one else was listening, then leaned in slightly. "Hayes is poison. He comes not to eat, but to test. He used to dine at my cousin's place in New York. Fired 3 sous chefs with a single blog post." Aisha's stomach turned. "I cannot protect you if you fail," he continued. "But if you succeed," he hesitated. "If you succeed, they will have to see you." The words landed like bricks. Not a promise, but a challenge. Before she could respond, a loud bang echoed from the back door. One of Hayes' assistants storming in with a clipboard, barking updates about the upcoming Thursday dinner. The menu must be perfect. The assistant shouted into the chaos of the kitchen. No substitutions. No slip-ups. He expects 3 pairings, minimum. The truffles must be imported. The caviar must be chilled exactly at 36 degrees. Staff scattered like ants. The tension escalated instantly. And, the assistant added sharply, he specifically requested the same waitress as last time. The new girl. Heads turned. Aisha felt the heat of every stare. Camille's eyes narrowed. He requested her. The implication lingered. What game was Hayes playing now? Aisha stepped forward, chin raised. "I'll be ready." No one responded. But the silence said everything. This wasn't just a meal anymore. It was a battlefield. The next few nights blurred into one. Aisha barely slept. Her flashcards now lived in her pockets. Her locker, her bathroom mirror. She practiced phrases while sweeping, while serving, even while brushing her teeth. Luca grew distant, quietly supportive but no longer as eager to meet behind the wine rack. Something about that anonymous note still haunted her. Don't trust the boy who offers help. She hadn't brought it up to him. Not yet. But the distance between them widened just enough to cast shadows. Still, Aisha pushed forward. 2 nights before Hayes' return, Marcel called her into the walk-in fridge. The fluorescent light flickered above, casting a harsh glow over the chilled meats and produce bins. He stood there with a somber expression, arms crossed. "You've worked harder than anyone here," he said. She nodded, unsure where he was going. "But Hayes doesn't care about hard work. He cares about image, power, flawlessness." "I understand," she said softly. "No," he replied. "You don't. If you trip over one word, he will write it. He will quote it. And he will destroy you." Her heart stilled. "You don't get another chance," he said. "Not here. Not in this restaurant." Aisha stared at the frost forming along the fridge wall. Her breath came out in white clouds. She thought of her mother back in Detroit, working double shifts as a janitor. She thought of her younger brother still in school, asking if he could be a lawyer one day. She thought of the first time she heard her grandmother speak French, how it sounded like music, like freedom. "I won't fail," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Marcel didn't nod. He didn't reassure her. He simply turned, pushed open the door, and left her in the cold silence. As Aisha steps out of the fridge, she hears Camille on a call behind the bar. "Yes, Mr. Hayes. She's practicing every night. But don't worry, she won't last through dessert." The Thursday evening sky hung heavy over Chicago, a slate-gray canvas split by slow flashes of lightning in the far distance. But inside Le Rouge Noir, the storm was already gathering. Staff moved with clinical urgency, voices clipped, backs straight. The chandeliers glistened above, their glow casting warm reflections on crystal glassware. Every surface had been scrubbed twice, every napkin folded to perfection, every bottle of wine chilled to exact temperature. But the real tension wasn't in the kitchen or behind the bar. It was centered on one name, Alexander Hayes. He hadn't even arrived yet, and already, his presence warped the atmosphere. The maitre d' triple-checked reservations. A sommelier, rehearsed vintages, like prayer. A sous chef redid a sauce from scratch after Marcel detected a half-degree of deviation. And Aisha? She stood near the host station, her hands pressed lightly against the front of her apron, inhaling through her nose, counting backwards in French. Dix neuf few. Each number steadied her. Each word reminded her why she was here. "Table 9 is yours tonight," said Marla, the floor manager, without looking her in the eye. "Don't mess it up." Aisha didn't flinch. She only nodded. The pressure no longer felt foreign. It was familiar now. Heavy, yes, but she had trained under it. Moments later, the door opened. In swept Hayes. He was dressed in a tailored navy suit, smooth and sharp, as if he had been cut out of the skyline itself. His face betrayed no emotion, but the glint in his eyes wasn't subtle. He knew exactly what his arrival meant. Behind him came three guests: a high-powered attorney, a venture capitalist from New York, and a media executive with a scandal buried just enough beneath her heels. They spoke in clipped tones, confident, fluent in the language of transactions and control. Hayes didn't wait to be led. He walked straight to table 9, his preferred corner spot, back against the wall, full view of the room. Aisha approached with care. Her heart raced beneath her uniform, but her steps were measured, her expression neutral. "Good evening, Mr. Hayes," she said in calm, perfect French, "and welcome back to Le Rouge Noir. May I present tonight's menu?" His brow lifted. Just a flicker. The guests looked up, mildly surprised. Hayes smirked, taking the menu. "Your accent's improved." Aisha smiled faintly, not giving him the satisfaction of reacting. Mercy. The room shifted. Patrons nearby leaned ever so slightly toward the table. The incident from last week hadn't been forgotten. Phones were out, half hidden under linen. Everyone was waiting. Would she fail again? Or would she dare to rise? She began the formal introduction of the specials, reciting each dish, its French name followed by a description in fluent English. Her cadence was smooth, her pronunciation sharp, not a syllable stumbled. Her voice, low and melodic, cut through the murmur of the restaurant. Even Hayes's companions paused their conversations. The media executive raised a brow. "She's good," she murmured to him. Hayes didn't reply. His jaw was set in a way that could have meant curiosity or irritation. As Aisha stepped away to retrieve the drink list, she caught Camille watching her from the other end of the floor. There was no support in her eyes, only calculation, maybe even contempt. Returning to the table, Aisha presented the wine list with practiced elegance. Hayes didn't even glance at it. "I'm in the mood for something challenging," he said. "Let's see if you're as sharp as your accent now." Aisha didn't blink. "Of course, sir." He leaned back in his chair. "We'll be starting with the oysters. Pair that with something classic. But then we're moving to truffle risotto, and I want something unusual. Something with structure." He paused deliberately. "Surprise me." Aisha nodded. She knew the menu, knew the cellar, and more importantly, she knew how he operated now. This wasn't about the wine. This was a test, one designed not just to trip her but to embarrass her intellectually. Choosing the wrong pairing would mean she hadn't studied hard enough. Choosing something too obscure would signal arrogance. It was a minefield. "Certainly," she replied smoothly. "For the oysters, I'd suggest a Sancerre from the Loire Valley. Bright acidity, mineral edge. For the truffle risotto," she paused, letting the weight of her next words fill the space. "A white Hermitage. 2017. Full-bodied, rich, but with the finesse to carry the earthiness of the truffle without overwhelming it." The table fell silent. Even Hayes's attorney blinked. A beat passed. Then another. Hayes lifted his glass and took a sip of water, slow and unreadable. "Interesting choice," he said finally. "I'll have it brought out," Aisha replied, voice calm, posture intact. She turned on her heel and walked to the back, her breathing steady, but her fingers trembled just slightly as she reached for the cellar key. Behind her, she didn't see Hayes lean toward Camille, who now stood uncomfortably near their table. "She's improved," he muttered. "But that doesn't mean she's safe." Camille whispered something back, too low to catch. But as Aisha disappeared behind the wine cellar door, a strange glint passed between them. In the cellar, as Aisha reaches for the Hermitage bottle, she discovers something wrong. The label has been tampered with. It's not the 2017 vintage. Someone has switched it, and serving the wrong year could cost her everything. The cellar was cool, its air heavy with the scent of corkwood and aged oak. Aisha's fingers glided across the bottles, eyes sharp, scanning for the white hermitage she had studied, memorized even. 2017. Domaine Jean-Louis Chave, a creamy white with bone-dry finesse, and just enough roundness to dance with truffles. She could taste it already, hear herself introducing it. It had to be perfect. But when she found the bottle, her heart dropped. The label read. She blinked, then checked again, her pulse kicking up a notch. No, this can't be right. She had reviewed the inventory the night before with Luca. The 2017 was here, tucked behind the Barrelos, exactly where it should be. But now 3 bottles of 2020 sat in its place. Vintage mattered, especially to men like Alexander Hayes. One wrong year and the flavor profile changed entirely. Structure, acidity, age. She could picture the scene already, him lifting the glass, swirling, tasting, then sneering. A trap. A perfect one. She felt the walls of the cellar closing in. Then she remembered something. 3 days ago, Camille had been on inventory duty. She never handled wine, yet she'd lingered here longer than necessary, mumbling something about rechecking labels. Aisha hadn't questioned it then. Now she did. Hands steadying, Aisha moved to reserve shelf. She recalled Luca's quiet mention about the secondary crate, reserved bottles hidden behind the display ones for special nights. Digging past the decoys, her fingers closed around 2017. Domaine Jean-Louis Chave. Hermitage Blanc. Aisha exhaled through her nose, fierce and focused. Nice try, Camille. She returned to the kitchen like a soldier stepping onto a battlefield, bottle tucked firmly under her arm. There was no hesitation now, no fear, only fire. The maitre d' noticed the vintage and gave a slow, approving nod. But Aisha didn't pause for approval. She returned to table 9 with poise, balancing the tray like a practiced symphony conductor. Her steps were silent, her breath even. Your pairings, she said in smooth, unbroken French, pouring with elegant restraint. A Sancerre, crisp and mineral-rich, to complement your oysters. And for the truffle risotto, she turned to Hayes, eyes level. A 2017 Hermitage Blanc. Rounded yet sharp, structured like your questions. Hayes stared at her. The air at the table shifted. Guests leaned slightly closer, expressions sharpening. She placed the glasses before each guest with graceful precision. Her posture never wavered. Neither did her voice. One guest lifted his glass. She nailed it. The woman next to him followed suit, eyebrows lifting. That's delicate, she murmured. You don't taste this level of pairing often. Not even in New York. But it was Hayes's reaction that rewrote the scene. He picked up his glass, inspected the legs, swirled gently. A pause. Then he tasted. His jaw froze mid-chew. Just for a second. A tiny break in composure. But Aisha saw it. The others didn't notice. But she did. That was the first crack. He set his glass down carefully, as if it might explode. How long have you been rehearsing that? He asked, still in English now, his voice low but laced with edge. Aisha straightened. Rehearsing what? He tilted his head. The language. The delivery. That ridiculous sommelier act. I've studied, she replied simply. I see, he said, smirking faintly. You practice to perform. Good memory. But anyone can mimic. Reciting lines isn't fluency. The table quieted again. An awkward tension replaced the earlier awe. Aisha inhaled slowly. This was his counterattack. He couldn't belittle her performance, so now he questioned its authenticity. The same game. New disguise. You want proof? She asked, keeping her tone measured. I want depth, Hayes replied. Impressing tourists with phrases is easy, but real understanding, that's harder. Let's say, he turned to one of his guests. Ask her something. Anything. Let's see if she's learned anything beyond the flashcards. The guest chuckled, slightly uncomfortable. This feels a little... No, Hayes said, smiling without warmth. Let's give her a fair chance. The woman nodded, switching into fluent French and firing off a fast, complex sentence. Something about the vintage's fermentation process, the use of oak barrels, and terroir variations in northern Rhone. It wasn't just fast. It was technical. Aisha didn't flinch. She responded in clean, elegant French, slightly accented, but fluent, breaking down the winemaking process, the soil influence, the altitude differences between Hermitage and Croz's Hermitage. And then, with a subtle edge, she added, of course it's easier to appreciate a wine when you understand its origins. not just taste it. A woman leaned back, eyes wide. Another guest murmured, "Damn." Hayes's jaw ticked. He reached for his glass again. Didn't sip, just held it. His control, so precise, so calculated, had started to slip, and Aisha could feel the room shifting again. No longer were they waiting for her to fail. Now, they were watching him. But Hayes wasn't finished. He leaned forward slowly, voice dropping just above a whisper. "I've seen your type before," he said. "Smart enough to make it interesting, not smart enough to stay quiet." Aisha blinked once, holding his gaze. "I don't want to stay quiet," she replied, her voice clear. "I want to be heard." His face stilled. Then he laughed. Just once. A small, dangerous sound. "Let's raise the bar then," he said. "No more simple orders. I want a vertical tasting next. 3 vintages. Explain the evolution." En France. Aisha nods, turning back toward the cellar, only to find the reserve door locked. The key, missing from her apron. Someone has cut her access, and the next test is moments away. The cold metal of the cellar door pressed against Aisha's palm like a silent dare. It didn't budge. Locked, her fingers instinctively went to her apron. But the key was gone. Panic whispered at the edge of her resolve, tempting her to spiral. But she refused to spiral. Not here. Not now. She turned, eyes scanning the hallway, and spotted Marcel at the end, arms crossed, watching everything unfold. Their eyes locked. He didn't move, just gave a slow, subtle nod. Permission? Encouragement? She didn't know, but something in it calmed her. Aisha pivoted sharply and headed to the backup station. She didn't need that cellar. She needed her mind. Within 3 minutes she had arranged 3 bottles. 2012, 2015, and 2017. Hermitage Blancs. From different shelves. All available. All authentic. Not from the locked reserve, but still potent. Still rich in story. She returned to table 9, her movements smooth, as if nothing had gone wrong. Hayes looked up with a smirk, but it faltered the moment she began speaking. Fluent French flowed from her mouth, not mechanical or memorized, but warm, nuanced, alive. She described the evolution of the Hermitage terroir, through the 3 vintages, the seasonal shifts that shaped each bottle's notes. She painted with words: wet stone, sun-ripened apricots, honeysuckle, uncracked clay. Her voice lowered slightly when describing the 2015, a year kissed by rain, where the barrels held secrets too soft to shout. Hayes didn't blink. The guests? They were transfixed. Even the ones who had rolled their eyes earlier now leaned forward, hands on stems, drinking in every word. She shifted effortlessly between French and English, translating only when necessary. She wasn't just reciting, she was teaching, commanding the space with the ease of someone who had fought for it tooth and nail. Even Camille, stationed by the bar, froze mid-pour. Across the room, Marcel stepped out of the kitchen. He didn't speak, didn't nod. He just watched. By the time she poured the 3rd vintage, silence had swallowed the restaurant. Only the violinist continued to play, as if afraid to interrupt something sacred. Hayes lifted his glass, swirling the 2017 carefully. He sipped. A beat passed. Then another. "You've been busy," he said quietly. Aisha didn't smile. She didn't nod. She simply replied, "You've been watching the wrong people." Hayes' jaw twitched. Something cracked behind his eyes. Not rage, not shame, but something deeper: recognition. The unsettling realization that his control over this moment had evaporated. He glanced at Camille briefly, then back at Aisha. "You know I could still bury you with a single blog post." Her voice didn't waver. "Then make sure your words are accurate." The table stilled. For the first time, Alexander Hayes had been cornered without a raised voice, without drama, just precision, elegance, truth. The tension didn't release. It transformed. What had once been dominance became scrutiny. The room didn't just look at Aisha differently. They looked at him differently. He was no longer untouchable. He was a man facing a woman who had refused to be broken by his subtle cruelty. When the courses arrived, he said nothing, just ate quietly, his gaze low. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Aisha floated between tables, tending to guests who now offered her smiles and curious glances. Whispers followed her, but not the biting kind, the admiring kind, the kind that lingered in reputations. Camille avoided her. Luca offered her a proud nod from across the bar, but said nothing. She still hadn't confronted him about the mysterious note warning her not to trust him. That would come later. At closing, while staff mopped floors and polished glasses, Aisha found a small white envelope taped to her locker. No name, just the words. See me. Office. Now. Her stomach tightened. Had Hayes complained? Had she overstepped? She walked down the narrow hall, past the storage room, toward the manager's office. The door was cracked open. Marla sat at the desk, flipping through paperwork. Without looking up, she slid a slim rectangular card across the desk. Aisha picked it up. It was black, matte finished with a gold embossed logo. Sommelier trainee appointment. Effective immediately. Her breath hitched. Marla looked up, tired but unreadable. You've stirred things, she said. Aisha stayed silent. Marla sighed. Hayes didn't say a word, which, in his case, is practically a compliment. Aisha clutched the card, hands trembling slightly. You earned it, Marla added. But it won't make things easier. Some people will say we promoted you because of pressure. Others will say it's a PR stunt. Aisha met her gaze. Let them say it. I'll still be standing. Marla gave the faintest smile. That's what I thought. As Aisha turned to leave, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. A single text. Unknown number. This isn't over. He doesn't lose quietly. Aisha steps into the staff hallway, only to find her locker door ajar, and inside her flashcards have been shredded. Every single one, and taped to the back wall, is a note in red ink. Let's see you pronounce it now. The promotion card felt heavier than it looked. Aisha sat alone on the employee bench outside Le Rouge Noir, her coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders, the crisp Chicago air biting at her skin. The street lamps flickered above, casting long golden shadows, but her eyes were fixed on the card in her hand. Sommelier trainee appointment. Effective immediately. It gleamed in the moonlight, a quiet crown on a battlefield strewn with emotional debris. She should have been celebrating. This was the role she had fought for, studied for, sweated for, bled self-doubt for, and yet, instead of triumph, a different emotion swirled in her chest. Am I ready? She remembered every stumble on the path, every cruel chuckle from Hayes, every silent judgment from Camille. The flashcards now shredded in her locker, like a warning carved in paper. Was this really about her talent, or had she just become a symbol, a temporary fix for a restaurant, trying to mend its optics after a public humiliation? Luca found her outside 20 minutes later. I heard, he said quietly, sitting beside her. Congratulations. Aisha didn't look up. They destroyed my flashcards. He hesitated. You think it was Camille? I don't think, she said, voice low. I know, but I can't prove it. Luca exhaled, rubbing his hands together for warmth. So what now? She turned to him, her eyes sharp. Now I prove them all wrong. I earned this role so well they regret ever questioning it. Inside, her training began the very next day. She was paired with Leandro, the senior sommelier, an older Venezuelan man, with a hawkish nose, a quiet voice and decades of experience. He didn't smile much, he didn't talk much, either, but his eyes watched her closely, like he was measuring not just her knowledge but her soul. Each morning began with scent drills, blindfolded sniff tests of spices, fruits, oils. By afternoon, she practiced describing complex wines with precise vocabulary, in both English and French. By evening, she was on the floor walking tightropes with customers who assumed she was still just a waitress. One evening, as she passed Hayes's corner booth, empty now, Marla called her aside. He left something for you, she said, handing her a sleek envelope. Aisha opened it slowly. Inside was a single card, engraved with Hayes' signature in silver. Beneath his name, handwritten in his unmistakable script, was a message. Consider joining me for a private tasting. My cellar is more advanced than your current curriculum. Friday. 7 p.m. Address enclosed. Dress accordingly. No smile. No warmth. Just invitation veiled as challenge. Aisha's pulse spiked. Marla looked at her cautiously. You don't have to go. I know, Aisha replied. She read the note again. This wasn't an olive branch. It was bait. Aisha spent the next 3 days in emotional limbo. Her training intensified. Leandro growing slightly more approving with each session, even as whispers thickened in the air around her. She's skipping steps, Camille whispered behind the kitchen door. Nobody becomes a sommelier in 3 weeks. I heard she's only getting attention because of Hayes. another added. Aisha pretended not to hear, but the words sunk their claws in. Not because they were true, but because they echoed what her own doubt whispered at 3 a.m. That Friday, just hours before the event, Marcel cornered her near the staff lockers. I heard you're going to Hayes' mansion. Aisha didn't confirm or deny. He studied her face. Don't go alone. I can handle him. Marcel nodded slowly, but his eyes remained dark. It's not him I'm worried about. It's what he represents. Be careful which world you step into. They don't all want you to walk out. That evening she stood in front of a wrought iron gate 3 stories high, staring at a house that looked more like a fortress than a home. Hayes' mansion was perched on the lakefront, surrounded by manicured hedges and cameras that blinked like watchful eyes. She wore a charcoal gray dress, elegant but understated, heels just high enough to say confidence not vanity. The butler led her through marbled corridors, past walls lined with oil paintings, until they reached a cellar entrance framed by hand-carved oak. There Hayes waited. He wore no tie, just a crisp white shirt, collar open, sleeves slightly rolled. He smiled, not cruelly this time, but like a man amused by his own puzzle. Welcome, Aisha. She nodded, refusing to shrink. This is quite a place. He gestured toward the cellar. I find wine best appreciated in silence. Come. The cellar was vast. Rows of bottles stored with almost obsessive care. Cool air whispered between the racks. He poured 2 glasses from a decanter, swirling the wine slowly. Chateau d'Yquem, 1990, he said. Rare. Expensive. Sweet as sin. She took the glass. Sip. Notes of honey. Dried apricot. Saffron. Perfection. He watched her like he always did, not for her words, but for weakness. What do you want from me? She asked softly. Truth, he said simply. About what? He stepped closer. About whether you belong in my world, or if this is all just theater. Her jaw tightened. I don't need your validation. No, he replied, but you crave it. That struck deeper than she expected. You see, he continued, swirling his glass, talent can be taught. Hunger can't. And you're starving. Aisha stared at him. You're testing me again. I'm investing, he said. I could make you a face of a new brand. Wines. Events. Prestige. It would be a headline that erases the restaurant fiasco. She laughed bitterly. You humiliate me in public and offer me a brand in private? He didn't flinch. That's how the world works. Redemption is a currency. She stepped back. I'm not for sale. No, he said. But everyone has a price. As she turns to leave, Hayes says one last thing. Quietly. Carefully. I know about Luca's father, and why you shouldn't trust him. Ask Luca what he's hiding, before it's too late. Aisha's breath clouded on the window of the town car, as it wound through Chicago's affluent North Shore, the skyline receding behind manicured hedges and private security booths. She gripped her clutch tighter with each passing mile, the silence inside the vehicle amplifying the thrum in her chest. Hayes's final words from their last meeting refused to loosen their grip on her thoughts. Ask Luca what he's hiding, before it's too late. But tonight wasn't about Luca, or at least it wasn't supposed to be. It was about the invitation that now lived like a brand in her pocket. Private tasting, formal guests only. French-speaking preferred. Black tie. 7 p.m. sharp. The gate to Hayes's mansion opened with silent efficiency, and the car slid inside, swallowed by a driveway so long it felt like a red carpet paved in stone. The house loomed ahead like an old-world chateau, imposing, sprawling, and immaculate. Aisha stepped out, her heels crunching against the gravel. The air smelled of lavender and wealth. Inside, light bathed every surface. Chandeliers, sculptures, marble columns. She walked slowly, the low hum of violins rising from a corner she couldn't yet see. Her dress was a deep emerald that caught the light just enough to command attention, but not scream for it. Luca had helped her choose it. That thought now felt jagged. A butler led her through a corridor where portraits of European estates lined the walls. Before she could steady her nerves, she was ushered into a drawing room, filled with crystal flutes, murmured French, and the scent of caviar and champagne. She was the only black woman in the room. Eyes turned. Not with surprise. This crowd was trained not to blink too obviously, but with recognition. She was not a person here. She was a novelty, an intriguing addition. Hayes materialized by her side moments later, his voice warm but rehearsed. Ah, Our rising star. Everyone, this is Aisha Jackson, our newest sommelier trainee at Le Rouge Noir. The introduction wasn't about her title. It was about where she came from. Not here. A tall man with silver hair and a silk scarf stepped forward. His accent was thick Parisian. His smile paper thin. "I've heard of you," he said. "The waitress who speaks wine like a poet. Tell me, how did you acquire your accent?" Aisha returned the smile. "Late nights, library books, and a grandmother who believed in beauty even when the world didn't." There was a brief pause, a slow, intentional one. Then polite laughter. But not kind laughter. Amused, measured.
The Frenchman nodded. How curious.
That word, curious, it stuck like gum under her shoe. She'd heard it before. In college applications, in job interviews, in the mouths of people who said diversity like it was an accessory. As the guests resumed conversation, Aisha drifted to a corner where rare wines were displayed like relics. She studied a label, Domaine de la Romanée Conti 1996, but felt a presence behind her before she turned. A woman in a navy gown stood with a flute of champagne, and a gaze that cut. "You're quite composed," she said in French, voice lilting. "Most guests like you either perform too loudly or disappear." Aisha met her stare evenly. "Maybe I'm not here to do either." The woman raised an eyebrow. "You should be careful. Too much elegance from the unexpected source unsettles this room." "I know," Aisha said. "That's why I'm here." The woman's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. Moments later, Hayes clinked his glass. Conversations quieted as he called attention to a long mahogany table in the center of the room. A wine flight was arranged, a showcase of vintages chosen by Hayes himself. He motioned to Aisha. "Why don't you begin the tasting, Miss Jackson?" he said, switching to French. "You've studied these wines, yes." Her pulse spiked. This wasn't rehearsal. This was performance. Aisha stepped forward, palms steadying. She examined the first bottle, and 04 Chateau Margaux, then began. Her voice flowed like silk through the room, describing terroir, harvest conditions, and subtle notes of aging. She didn't just speak French, she breathed it, filling the space with texture and knowledge that silenced even the most jaded connoisseurs. By the third glass, guests were exchanging glances, not skeptical ones now, but impressed, even uneasy. Her command of the room was total. Hayes watched from the shadows, a drink untouched in his hand. After the tasting, the crowd splintered into private circles. Aisha wandered near the terrace, trying to catch her breath. She overheard pieces of conversation behind her. Incredible poise for someone so raw. She might actually have a future, but who brought her in again? Then near the fireplace, she heard a name that froze her blood. Stanton. She turned slightly, eavesdropping without meaning to. "He's funding Hayes's new label. Same guy who bankrolled that lawsuit in Atlanta. Targeted the NAACP, remember? Said they were anti-American." Another voice chimed in. "Didn't he donate to that senator's campaign? The one who tried to reinstate the English-only bill?" The laughter was dry. Ironic, given the company here tonight. Aisha's skin prickled. Her spine straightened. She scanned the room until her eyes landed on a man in a pale gray suit, standing beside Hayes. It was Stanton. He was smiling directly at her. And just then, the shape of the evening twisted. This wasn't just a party. It was a grooming ground. An image factory. A space where influence bled into ownership. She had been invited not just for her talent but for her utility. Hayes approached again, wine in hand, voice light. Impressed by the company, Aisha's throat dried. "Stanton's funding you now. He's generous with those he believes in. And he believed in dismantling civil rights groups?" Hayes smiled. "You're here because I believe in your ability to rise. Don't let irrelevant politics distract from opportunity." Her fists curled against the fabric of her dress. She felt trapped between two worlds, one of hard-won success, the other of moral compromise. Before she could speak, Hayes leaned in. "Do you want to climb, or stay righteous in a room that's already moved past you?" Aisha turns away, only to see Luca at the edge of the room, standing beside Stanton. Their eyes meet. He looks ashamed. She realizes Luca wasn't just helping her, he was. The dining room had been transformed into a temple of indulgence. Candlelight flickered off imported crystal, casting sharp diamonds of light across white linen and porcelain. Each plate was a statement, each fork a threat wrapped in etiquette. Every chair around the custom-built oak table held more than just a guest. It held a gatekeeper. Aisha sat near the center, not at the head, but closer than comfort allowed. To her left, Stanton murmured softly with another investor from Vienna. To her right, Hayes sipped his wine like it was a private joke. Every guest at the table had arrived with something to prove, and something to protect. And Aisha. She had arrived with a knife pressed between her ribs, metaphorically sharp, emotionally real. The first course arrived, foie gras torchon, with sauternes drizzle. Conversation picked up like a current, swirling around food and finance. Hayes lifted his glass. "Our guest of honor," he said, voice just loud enough to cut through the room. "Miss Aisha Jackson, who I should add, is not only a rising sommelier, but the most unexpected voice in wine I've encountered in years." The room chuckled politely. A few investors offered her nods of amusement, curiosity, not yet respect. "Tell me, Aisha," said a sharp-jawed woman in a red dress seated opposite her. "How would you pair a dish like this outside of Sauternes?" Aisha didn't miss a beat. A late-harvest Riesling from Mosel would work. Less viscosity, more acidity. It cuts the richness differently, more minerality than honey. Red dress nodded slowly. "Impressive, but less romantic," chimed in a British voice down the table. "Sauternes has heritage. Stories. Riesling's still trying to prove it belongs." Aisha leaned forward. Respectfully. "Heritage doesn't make something superior. It just makes it louder in the history books."
The room quieted.
Then another man asked, "Do you believe American wines deserve the same reverence as French vintages?" Aisha looked at him, her tone precise. "I believe soil doesn't carry prejudice. But sometimes, people do." A few gasps. Hayes raised his brow, bemused. One guest stifled a smirk behind their napkin. The second course arrived, truffle-stuffed pheasant with pommes dauphine. The moment the server retreated, the interrogation continued, not formal, not hostile, but the kind of targeted curiosity that only power uses when it suspects merit is encroaching. "What's your take on terroir in climate-shifted Bordeaux?" asked a man who hadn't stopped swirling his burgundy since he sat down. "Deeper roots are revealing things growers used to ignore," Aisha replied. "It's humbling the arrogant and elevating the overlooked." A few chuckled. One man clapped lightly. "You're not afraid of bold words," Stanton said, cutting through the laughter. "I'm more afraid of silence," she responded, turning her gaze briefly toward him. The edge in her voice wasn't accidental. Each course brought new attacks disguised as questions, from blending controversies to fermentation ethics, to the role of biodynamic rituals in modern production. She met them all, with poise, with knowledge, with a kind of armor woven not just from study, but from the lived experience of always having to know more just to be seen. By dessert, lavender creme brulee, paired with a chilled condrieu, the mood at the table had shifted. No longer were the guests amused. They were impressed. Hayes leaned back, lips drawn tight but eyes flickering with something between irritation and intrigue. "You've studied a great deal," he said quietly. Aisha lifted her glass. "I've lived a great deal." A subtle nod moved through the table. For a moment it felt like she'd arrived, until Hayes pushed his chair back, slowly rising. "One final question," he said, "since you've handled the wines, the politics, and the philosophies." His voice dipped just slightly, sharpened into the blade it was always meant to be. "Where did you learn your French?" Aisha blinked. "Self-taught. Family background." He tilted his head. "You mean your grandmother?"
Yes.
"She didn't go to school in France, did she?" "No." Hayes's tone lightened, but his eyes hardened. "So no formal training? No certificate, no degree in enology? No sommelier guild placement?" "No," Aisha answered, each syllable carefully measured. Hayes smiled for the crowd, but not for her. "And yet here you are, correcting experts, lecturing investors and assuming the authority of someone with formal roots in the field." A tight pause followed. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge, veiled as exposure. The kind that said, "You don't belong here. You fooled them. But not me." Aisha's shoulders remained still, but something inside her twisted. The room watched her now not as a guest but as a possible imposter. She could feel Camille's words, echoing in her mind, from weeks ago. "They'll always see you the same." But she refused to let him have the last word. She turned to the table. "My education didn't come from a wine school in the south of France." she said, voice low but clear. It came from public libraries in Detroit, from bus rides with flashcards, from watching my mother clean rooms for people who used words like refined to mean white. I speak this language because no one expected me to. And maybe that's what makes me dangerous. The silence that followed was so thick, it pulsed. Stanton looked away. The woman in red dropped her eyes. Hayes remained smiling, but it was stretched now tight around the edges. Just as dessert is cleared, a waiter delivers a small, handwritten note to Aisha's plate. It reads, "They know about your brother. You should leave before they do something with it." The note rested beside Aisha's dessert plate like a bomb wrapped in cursive. "They know about your brother. You should leave before they do something with it." She read it twice before her pulse caught up. Her fingers trembled just enough to make the glass of Condrio beside her clink. She didn't look up immediately. She couldn't. She knew every eye in the room would see too much. A quick glance around confirmed her fear. Hayes was watching her, not blinking. Stanton's gaze too felt heavier now, like he was weighing not just her knowledge but her entire past. She slipped the note under her napkin, pressing it flat against the table, as if her hand alone could erase the threat. But her mind was already racing. How would they know about Marcus? Her brother had kept a low profile since his brief entanglement with the law. Wrong place, wrong time, trumped up charges for a crime he didn't commit. He'd served 6 months in a juvenile facility before being cleared. Even then, the record never fully disappeared. It clung like smoke. The room hadn't changed. The music still played, wine still flowed, and plates were still being cleared. But everything inside Aisha had shifted. She rose from the table without waiting for an excuse, walked calmly toward the terrace doors, and pushed them open. Outside, the air was thick with lake mist and luxury. Her breath left her in small clouds. She leaned against the stone railing, trying to steady her heartbeat with the rhythm of the water below. Moments later, the terrace doors opened behind her. Footsteps. She didn't need to look.
Hayes.
He stood beside her, silent for a few beats. "Then you're good. Better than I thought. Is that why you came for my brother?" His head tilted. So it was true. Aisha turned sharply. "Is that the game now? Dig up personal records to prove your superiority?" "I don't play games," he replied coolly. "But my investors do. And they ask questions when someone rises too fast." "You mean questions they wouldn't ask if I were white?" Hayes didn't flinch. They wouldn't have had to. The knife in her chest twisted deeper. But she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of bleeding. He stepped forward slightly. "You could have lied. Made up a French boarding school. Said you studied at Chateau Smith Hautes Lafitte. Instead, you gave them truth. Unpolished. Raw. Brave." She looked at him, brows furrowed. "Why does that sound like a compliment laced with pity?" He didn't smile this time. "Because I don't pity you. I respect you. Which is exactly why I'm about to offer you something most people in that room will never get." Aisha narrowed her eyes. He pulled a slim folder from his blazer and handed it to her. Inside, a proposal. Executive Curator. Jackson Sellers. A signature line already bore his initials. "It's a new venture. Your face. Your name. My money. Wines curated by your palate. Sold under your vision. Events, travel, publications, complete independence under my umbrella." She stared at it, heart thudding. "I told you," he said softly, "I invest in hunger, not history. This would erase the diner mistake. Cement you as someone worth betting on." Aisha closed the folder slowly. "And if I say no?" He shrugged. "Then I'll find someone else. Probably less deserving. Certainly less poetic." She looked out over the water again. "You saw what they did tonight. How they shifted. For a moment, I had them." "You did," he agreed. "Until you reminded them of who I am." Hayes didn't speak. She turned to him. "You used my brother. You watched me expose myself in that room. Then you weaponized it. You exposed yourself by choice," he replied calmly. "And they respected you for it, until they got scared." He leaned in slightly. "This offer isn't a handout. It's a chess move. You get to stay on the board." Aisha held his gaze. "And the note?" "Wasn't from me," he said. "But if it forced clarity, then maybe it did you a favor." She didn't believe him, but she believed the fear he was betting on. The same fear that had gripped her since she first walked into Le Rouge Noir, that her rise would always be fragile, one mistake away from collapse. She looked at the folder again, her name printed so cleanly. It was everything she had wanted, but now it felt like a price tag. Behind them, the doors opened again. A few guests stepped onto the terrace, smiling politely, offering nods. The world was watching again. And Hayes? He stepped back, all confidence and calm. Think about it, he said. You've already told them your story. Now decide who gets to finish it. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the wind and her decision. As Aisha re-enters the house, she passes Luca near the hallway. He's arguing quietly, intensely with Stanton. She catches just one phrase. She wasn't supposed to get this far. The folder burned against Aisha's hip as she returned to Le Rouge Noir the next morning. No fire, no scorch marks, just the quiet heat of a decision too heavy to pocket. Inside it, the blueprint of a future most people like her never even got to see, let alone hold. Jackson Sellers. Her name, her vision. Funded by Hayes, powered by her story, and packaged for the same kind of elite audience that once mocked her French. But now that she'd been handed the keys to a palace built from the same system that had tried to shut her out, she couldn't tell whether it felt like progress or betrayal. The hallway buzzed with its usual pre-lunch chaos, cutlery clinked, orders rang from the kitchen, and the floor staff pretended they didn't notice her arrive early. Again. But behind their clipped greetings and sidelong glances, Aisha sensed something new. Whispers. Not just curiosity. Rumors. Camille didn't even wait until Aisha passed the bar before muttering, loud enough to hear, hope she doesn't forget where she came from once she gets her wine empire. Aisha paused. You can say it to my face. Camille turned, feigning innocence. I'm just surprised. That's all. 1 week you're crying over pronunciation. The next you're getting your own brand. I didn't ask for any of this. No, Camille said. But you didn't say no either. That line stuck, because it was true. Aisha hadn't said no. Not yet. Luca caught up with her in the break room later. His expression was tense, eyes darting like they always did when he had something to hide. You okay? He asked, his voice lower than usual. Are you? She shot back, watching him carefully. I saw you with Stanton. He tensed. Aisha folded her arms. He said you were supposed to keep an eye on me. Help me, but not too much. Was that true? Luca didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, and in it, Aisha felt something old and bitter rise. Did you help me because you believed in me, or because someone paid you to? I helped you because you were worth helping, he said quietly. But yeah, I was told to watch the girl with ambition. I didn't think it would go this far. Her chest ached, and now that it has, he looked down. Now I regret letting them anywhere near you. The weight of betrayal settled beside the folder in her bag. That evening, after most of the staff had clocked out, Marla called her into the office. The room was small, dim, cluttered with receipts and half-drunk coffee, but the tension inside could have filled a stadium. I heard from Hayes, Marla said, not looking up from her screen. He wants to make the announcement tomorrow. Aisha's stomach flipped. So soon. It's PR gold. The narrative's clean. Young black woman rises from waitress to wine mogul, with billionaire mentorship. The media team's already prepping headlines. Aisha sat slowly. I haven't agreed. I know, Marla said flatly. But in his world, silence is as good as a handshake. The window rattled faintly from wind. Aisha stared at the folder in her lap, its embossed logo staring back at her like a mirror. It's a good deal, Marla said. You'd be untouchable. Paid, public, protected. Unowned? Marla leaned back, arms crossed. That depends. Can you live with how you got there? That night, the staff room felt smaller than usual. Camille passed by without a word. A few others whispered as she packed her things. Some offered nods. Others, side-eyed. Aisha couldn't tell which stung more. The pride of success, or the suspicion that she had bought it with silence. In her apartment, she spread out the documents across the table. Contracts, mock-ups of wine labels, social media projections. Her own face stared back at her from one of them, smiling, confident, draped in elegance. It didn't even look like her. She called her mother. Ma, if someone gave you everything you ever dreamed of, but they'd tried to tear you down to get it, would you take it? Her mother didn't hesitate. Only if I could reshape it into something they never expected. Aisha closed her eyes, letting the words settle. The next morning, her alarm went off at 6:00 a.m., but she was already awake. By 6:45 she was standing outside Le Rouge Noir, folder in hand. The dining room was empty. Sunlight trickled through the curtains, catching dust and golden beams. Marla met her at the host stand with a clipboard. "They're expecting your decision before brunch service," she said. Aisha nodded, then pulled a single page from the folder. Her own conditions rewritten, rebranded. Curatorship, not ownership. Full creative control. Community engagement clause. A mentorship pipeline for underrepresented sommeliers. And no Stanton. Marla read it slowly. Raised an eyebrow. "He'll never agree to this." "Then he's not the right partner." Marla exhaled, almost amused. "You're going to make a lot of people nervous." Aisha smiled faintly. "Then maybe I'm doing it right." Marla's phone buzzes with a breaking news alert. Hayes has leaked the partnership to the press anyway. But the article lists Aisha as the co-founder, and someone's already dug up her brother's sealed juvenile record. The article hit before sunrise. Aisha hadn't even brushed her teeth when her phone buzzed with the first headline, a push notification screaming across the screen. From buzzer to billionaire's protege, black waitress to headline elite wine brand. She stared at it, still groggy, the weight of the words catching up like cold air seeping through cracks. By the time she scrolled down, her face had already been plastered on multiple media sites. Some were praising, others patronizing, but all of them carried the same tone, one that wrapped triumph around subtle insult. She defied the odds. She earned her seat. But can she hold it? Aisha sat on the edge of her bed, wrapped in an old hoodie from her college dropout year, scrolling through comment threads already bloated with opinions. Most didn't know her. None really cared. But their words felt like fingerprints pressed against her skin. She probably slept her way up. Hayes is just buying a diversity badge. Another token. Sad. Well-spoken. She's lucky, not qualified. Good for her. Representation matters. That last one should have offered some comfort. But it didn't. Because it wasn't just representation she wanted. It was respect. And now that respect was buried beneath noise she didn't control. Even worse, near the bottom of one gossip site's feature, in red font and capitalized for drama, sat a link that drained the blood from her face. Exclusive? The hidden past of Aisha Jackson's brother. Arrest records surface. She clicked. There it was. Marcus. 16. Mugshot. A petty theft charge that had since been wiped from public records after evidence proved his innocence. But the image remained, stripped of context, dressed in insinuation. They had reached into her past, not for truth but for leverage. She shut the phone off and let it fall to the floor. Silence returned, but her thoughts screamed. For the first time in weeks, she didn't reach for her flashcards, didn't open her notebook of French terms, or wine pairings. Instead, she lay back on the bed, staring at the cracked ceiling paint, and memory returned like floodwater. She was 8 again, standing in front of her third-grade class, reciting a story about her grandmother's garden. Her voice had danced through the room, her accent soft, laced with French phrases, but when she said "La menthe pousse près des tomates," mint grows near the tomatoes, her teacher stopped her. "Sweetheart," the teacher said gently but publicly, "let's stick to English. No need to confuse the class." The students had laughed. Aisha hadn't spoken French at school again for 3 years. Next came middle school. A group project. A boy she'd been paired with looked at her blankly and said, "You're actually smart? That's cool. You don't act, ghetto or anything." She'd smiled, pretended it was a compliment. And high school. The honors chemistry teacher, who asked if she was sure she belonged in the AP track. "It's not remedial, he said. Each time, she swallowed the moment, wrapped it in silence, buried it under ambition. But none of it had disappeared. It had only hardened. Until now, standing on the precipice of the biggest decision of her life, she realized her success had come at the cost of 100 small indignities. And now, the world wanted to write her story without asking her how it started. Did she accept Hayes's offer and with it, everything it implied? The spotlight, the platform, the scrutiny, the fact that his money would always sit beneath her name like scaffolding. Or did she walk away? Choose silence over exposure, dignity over dominance. She rose from bed and moved to her mirror. Her reflection stared back, tired, bruised but not broken. She thought of her grandmother. The stories whispered in French while cooking rice and beans. The patience in her voice, the elegance in her quiet defiance. She thought of Marcus, his calls from the juvenile facility, his tears when she first visited, his promise to stay invisible so she could shine. And she thought of herself, The girl who had once hidden her flashcards like secrets, who stood silent when mocked, who wanted so badly to belong, she nearly forgot to ask at what cost. A knock at the door broke the silence. It was Luca. He stood awkwardly, a coffee in one hand, a folded newspaper in the other. No smile, no excuses. "I figured you saw it," he said quietly. She nodded. "I didn't know they'd use Marcus," he said, his voice cracking. I thought this was about wine, about your talent. I didn't think they'd go that far." "You helped them," she said, not with anger, but with something heavier, disappointment. "I didn't know what I was part of until it was too late." She looked at the coffee in his hand, untouched. "I don't need sympathy," she said. "I need clarity." Luca set the coffee down. "Then make the story yours. On your terms, not theirs." She didn't reply. Not yet. Because clarity wasn't instant. It was a process. A reckoning. And tomorrow the world would expect an answer. As the clock strikes 9 a.m., Aisha gets a call from a major network producer, offering her a live national interview to discuss her historic partnership with Hayes. The segment is scheduled to air in 2 hours. The camera lights hit her skin like heat lamps, unforgiving and sterile. Aisha sat in a cream blazer, hands folded neatly in her lap, in the temporary studio a downtown network affiliate had set up in a corner office windowed, overlit, and humming with tension. She had just 1 hour to decide whether to step in front of the camera or walk away. The news cycle had exploded overnight. Social media timelines oscillated between celebration and suspicion. The trending headline was everywhere. Black waitress becomes face of billionaire wine empire. On Instagram, influencers praised her. She did that. Black excellence in action. On Twitter, the tone was split down the center. Some called it history. Others called it a stunt. One tweet read, "We're not winning if it means becoming pawns in the same systems that oppress us." Another replied, "Sis went from side station to brand owner. Respect." Isha couldn't breathe through any of it. Outside the media frenzy, real people, her people, were talking too. And not all the voices felt like comfort. Her cousin Denise had left a voicemail that morning. "I'm proud of you. But remember, you don't have to let anyone own your story to prove it's real." Her aunt, who still wore Sunday hats to church and refused to drink wine on principle, posted a status that read simply, "God lifts, not billionaires." And her brother? Marcus hadn't said a word. Not even a text. The silence said everything. Sitting in the green room before the segment, a producer tapped her shoulder. "You're up in 30. This could be the moment that defines the narrative. Be bold." She wanted to laugh at that. Defines the narrative. They'd already written her into a dozen versions. The Cinderella, the token, the savvy social climber, the poor black girl who got lucky, the symbol of a new, diverse capitalism. And all she'd done at the heart of it was survive a room that tried to shrink her. The host greeted her with the kind of tight smile TV anchors are trained for. Polished, polite, emptied of risk. "We're honored to have you," she said, her tone oozing faux warmth. "Your rise has been nothing short of viral." Aisha blinked slowly, resisting the urge to correct her. Viral was for videos of dogs wearing sunglasses, not human lives. On air, the questions came in soft packaging, but with hard edges. "So, what's it like being the first? Do you see yourself as a symbol of hope or success?" Some have called this opportunistic. Others call it inspiring. What do you call it? Every answer she gave, careful but honest, only seemed to twist in real time, reinterpreted to fit the story the audience wanted to hear. "I see this as hard work meeting opportunity, but opportunity with boundaries. I'm not here because of a handout. I'm here because I learned to speak a language they told me I wasn't born to understand." The anchor smiled, but her eyes flickered. Maybe it was too much truth, or maybe not enough performance. When the segment ended, Ayusha stood and stepped off set, the applause light still flashing behind her like it meant something. She barely made it back into the car before her phone lit up again. Text message. Unknown number. "Your brother's mugshot was just the beginning. Next is the footage. You have until midnight to walk away, or we'll show everyone who you really are." Her fingers locked around the phone as her throat closed. Footage? She racked her brain. What could they possibly have? Marcus hadn't touched a camera in years. He didn't even like taking pictures at family gatherings. What footage? Was it from the night of the arrest? Or something edited, twisted, weaponized? Her heart pounded. She knew how this worked now. They didn't need it to be true. They just needed it to look true. She texted Luca. Did you hear anything about footage? 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No reply. Her vision blurred with heat. Not again. Not after all this. Her name was finally rising. Not because of him. Not because of Hayes. But because she endured. And now the same hands that once clapped for her were ready to scroll and destroy. She stared at her reflection in the car window. No cameras. No angles. Just her. Tired. Tense. But not broken. She opened Instagram. Hundreds of new tags. DMs from strangers. Brands. Critics. Supporters. One post from a niche wine blogger stood out. Aisha Jackson isn't the future of wine because of who she stood beside. She's the future because of who she stood against. Quietly, eloquently, and without apology. A small flame sparked in her chest. Then her phone buzzed again. New DM. No name. Just a black screen. And the words, "We know where your brother works now." Accidents happen. That night, Aisha receives a call from Marcus. His voice is shaking. They followed me today. I think someone's watching the house. Aisha stood at the edge of her apartment balcony, the city skyline flickering below like a nervous heartbeat. Her phone lay on the table beside her. Screen black, notifications silenced. In that moment, the noise of the world, the interviews, the comments, the threats, faded into the low hum of wind weaving through buildings. But the weight didn't leave. It only sat quieter. Marcus's voice from earlier still rang in her ears. They followed me today. It hadn't been paranoia. She'd heard the panic. Her brother, always calm in the face of storms, had sounded rattled, exposed. And it all traced back to her. Her ambition, her rise, her refusal to stay small. The Jacksons had never been given anything. They fought for space in every room they entered. And now that fight had landed her here, offered a crown that might as well be made of glass, brittle and see-through. On the table beside her sat the revised contract from Hayes' legal team, emailed earlier that evening. It bore the name Jackson Cellars, and the branding had already begun. Mock-ups, packaging, a press rollout scheduled for the following week. Her face elegant, composed adorned the mock wine labels. Her face, his empire, in bold at the top. Co-founder and brand visionary, Aisha Jackson. But the fine print still told a different story. Hayes retained 70%. He held all final approval rights. And Stanton, though unnamed, remained listed in the strategic investment group. She'd read it 3 times. Each time, her chest grew tighter. It was, as the lawyer had put it, a generous offer. It was, as she saw it, a leash. And yet it was more than anyone from her world had ever been handed. This could change everything. But the voice in her head, her grandmother's voice, whispered louder. Don't let them pay you for your silence. Make them respect your voice. Aisha moved inside and pulled the curtain shut, shutting out the city lights. On her dining table, she spread out 2 piles of paper. In one pile, headlines, interview prep sheets, PR talking points. In the other, photos of Marcus' hand-drawn wine tasting notes, flashcards she had painstakingly remade after Camille destroyed the first set. Her life's real work. She closed her eyes. Flashbacks trickled through her mind, like rain on glass. The shame of being corrected in front of the class for using a French word with pride. The silence of teachers who questioned her place in advanced programs. The way Hayes had asked where she learned her French, not to be curious, but to remind her she wasn't supposed to know it. And then the quiet resilience. Her grandmother reading poems in French beside her in the kitchen, saying language is power. Learn the language of every room that tries to exclude you. Aisha sat down and opened her laptop. She pulled up the contract one last time, highlighted the terms she would no longer accept, then opened a new document, her version of the deal. It was no longer a request. It was a manifesto. 100% creative control. Minimum 50% equity ownership. All community investments to be led by an advisory board she selects. And Stanton removed entirely. She titled the document, Terms for a True Partnership. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about reputation. It was about liberation. She no longer wanted to join the table. She wanted to build her own. And if they walked away, then she'd start with nothing. Again. But this time, she'd start with her integrity. She hit send. No second drafts. No rereads. Just send. The email vanished into cyberspace. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling through her nose, the pressure in her chest releasing like a tightened valve. Finally let go. There would be fallout. Of course there would. Hayes wouldn't appreciate the ultimatum. His empire ran on quiet obedience dressed in designer freedom. And if the media got hold of her demands, she'd be painted as ungrateful, difficult, aggressive. But she'd rather be all of those things than a silent success story repackaged for someone else's narrative. Her phone buzzed. This time, it was Marcus. "I saw the contract," he said, his voice steadier now. "I saw what you changed." She smiled faintly. "Still think I should have played nice?" He laughed softly. "I think you played real." There was a pause. Then he added, "Whatever happens next, you already won." As she hung up, her inbox pinged with a new notification. Subject: terms for a true partnership. She stared at it for a moment. Heart thudding.
Then click.
The screen loads just the words, "Let's discuss this in person." No signature, no agreement. Only a date, time, and a location. It's not Hayes's office. It's a private vineyard outside the city. And the final battle for control is about to begin. If this story shook something in you, good. That means you're awake. Because Aisha's fight isn't fiction. It's a reflection. Every system that tried to silence her is still out there, wearing suits and smiling for cameras. So don't scroll past stories like this. Challenge them. Share them. And the next time someone says you don't belong, answer in a language they can't ignore.